Hello and welcome to this video essay which deals with the differences between, on the one hand, environmental sociology and on the other, environmental psychology, but also explores that there is a potential for some sort of overlap. By watching this video essay, you will not become in any way an expert in environmental psychology or environmental sociology. This is more of an explanation at a more, shall we say, meta level. This video essay is for anyone interested in these kinds of environmental questions and the use of environmental psychology and environmental sociology in activism, but also in research and in learning about society and learning about behavior and attitudes and so forth like that. So even if this was made with students in the environmental studies program at Malmö University in mind, it's actually has a much broader kind of content. So on the one hand, we have environmental sociology, and on the other hand, we have environmental psychology. What are these, and how are they related with each other? Let's start with environmental psychology. With environmental psychology, people are our central focus. We want to investigate people and their surroundings. Their environment influences them, and by surroundings this is meant a natural environment, but also the built environment like we are now here. And that is at least one kind of environmental psychology, one kind of focus or interest in the area of environmental psychology. We see it's the interactions between people and their surroundings. Yes, but there are other environmental psychologists who are interested in somewhat different things. They want to use tools and methods to study attitude formation, how people can have, so to speak, the right attitude towards a particular environmental problem, and yet something is stopping them from having an environmentally correct behavior. What is this? Why does this occur? Is there something that we could do to increase the likelihood that the positive and correct attitude will lead to a positive and correct behavior? That would be a question that environmental psychologists might be asking themselves. What stops this translation of the correct, in terms of the environment, attitude into an environmentally friendly behavior? We should also consider that environmental psychology, on the other hand, is not interested in individual people per se. Instead, environmental sociology is interested in the entire society and having an overview of society, and perhaps looking at particular groups, subgroups, institutions, rituals, norms, organizations, and the like in society, as well as looking at how information is transmitted from one place in society to another, and how this information is interpreted, and how societies come to reach a decision about what is fact and what is just somebody's opinion. And that kind of process can vary through time within a society or between societies. Environmental sociology wants to rise above the level of the individuals and look at society as a whole. Instead, environmental sociology wants to take in a much wider perspective and rise above the individuals in society. Environmental sociology concerns relationships between society with the environment, but also there are different kinds of relationships that take place within society and how these are affected by the environment, and how those relationships affect the environment as well. Rituals are something that could be in society as a whole or part of organizations, and we have rituals with. And there are sort of agreed upon ideas about what is acceptable or what is normal or what is the right way to do certain things in society. There are also processes where what is a fact is determined and what is an opinion or a strongly held view as opposed to a fact. These processes, in determining what is a fact and what is just a strongly held opinion, these can vary within subgroups in a society, from one subgroup to another, and we can see that there are differences through time within societies in this regard. The same thing with what sort of norms are acceptable, what sort of general ideas are acceptable in society. How society is organized is very different in the 2020s versus the 1920s versus the 1820s in a place like Sweden, where I am today. These societal level changes surely influence how we view the environment, and it also influences society's relations with the natural environment, consumption of resources, and practices of nature protection, and so forth. And at the society level, if there are different sort of acceptable ways of having relationships or interactions with the environment, then if there's more than one, people might fall into those different kinds of categories of what is considered acceptable. And those acceptable relationships might be a way where we can see that certain people in certain subgroups have this way of viewing and so forth. And within a subgroup, there could be particular individuals who have slightly different ideas. And they're part of the subgroup, but in a particular area, a particular environmental question, they're a little bit different compared to everyone else in the subgroup. So while environmental sociology has as an arena for an investigation, our arena is set at a societal level, environmental psychology is much more focused on individuals. On the other hand, there is a potential for overlap. People as individuals are embedded in society, and your attitudes do not arise in a vacuum. Someone might have the attitude to say, eat less meat than most other people in that particular society, or to think that to reduce environmental impact, I should prioritize buying second-hand clothing, or that recycling is important and therefore I act and make sure that I separate things and make sure that these items end up in recycling. However, if we take the first person with the attitude that maybe I should eat less meat for whatever reason, there could be varied reasons for that, but suppose this person is otherwise in a subgroup, and in this subgroup, in this part of society where this person has most of their friends and most of their relations, many of these people are what we could call big meat eaters. And that means that there is a subtle pressure in the subgroup to conform to this, to conform to the norms of the meat eaters, and not suddenly become a vegetarian or a vegan, say. And humans, we are social animals, so we want to belong to groups. And so that could help explain why a person may have an attitude to become, say, a vegetarian, but is stopped in their translation of attitude into behavior because of social reasons around them. In other words, we see that environmental psychology per se, just looking at the individual, is a bit of a problem. The individual is embedded in the sociological context. So in certain circumstances, environmental psychology needs to be informed by the surroundings, the environmental sociology. Another possibility besides the social reasons and the norms of the people in the subgroup, which I'm part of, or whoever it is, in the past, second-hand clothing shops in some places in the world, their prices there were often much lower than buying equivalent newer clothing. However, through time, second-hand clothing became, at least in some places in the world, fashionable and chic, and prices would start to rise as demand exceeded supply. But we are in an era of fast fashion. Cheaper, lower quality, but fashionable new clothing. And that might be all that the friend of the environment feels that she or he can afford.
Had they been around earlier, then they could have gone to the second-hand clothing shop and found bargains. That might be less of the case now, as things have become fashionable and chic, and some buy second-hand not because of the environment, but for other reasons. Likewise, suppose there are no recycling possibilities, physical recycling centers and source separation where you live, paper, glass, metal, etc., and food waste. Your positive attitude towards recycling and reducing your environmental impact is thwarted by organizations around you that are not interested in recycling. There might be a recycling center in your city, but to get there, you would need to take a car, and that would be a cost plus an environmental impact, and perhaps you do not have a driver's license. But think about this situation. There are no political parties or individual politicians in the city that want to push for recycling and to ensure that there's at least one recycling center and that maybe garbage and refuse collection is more based along the idea of source separation and collecting for recycling. And the reason why there might not be any political parties or individual politicians in your city that are elected to office, it could be because you and many other people in your city are not politically active, trying to translate your attitudes into social practice via the formal political system. And why is that? Could it be that society has influenced you? So at times we have a distance between the attitude of the individual and the behavior, and this gap might be explained using environmental psychology methodologies and theories, but it might also be explained by looking at society as a whole where the individual is embedded in. This means that there's a potential for an overlap between environmental psychology and environmental sociology. At the margins of environmental psychology, in a sense, taking environmental psychology as the focus here, we can see that environmental sociology might help the investigation forward or might help the campaign run by activists. Environmental sociology has a series of theories and models, and some of them are borrowed from or based on models and theories in sociology, but they could come from other places, say ethics. And the theories and models that environmental sociology primarily is based on deals with society or parts of society. Environmental psychology, with a focus on individuals, there are other theories and methods and other theories and models. The question asked in the two disciplines can therefore be very different. The questions and studies might complement each other. There can be different methodologies that favor the acquisition of data or information. So in other words, certain kinds of methodologies might be more often used by environmental sociologists, whereas others might be used more often by environmental psychologists. Or there could be an overlap. For example, a general methodology of interviews could be used both by an environmental sociologist and environmental psychologists, depending upon if that's the most efficient or effective way to try to answer the research question or research questions the researcher has. And in this circumstance, where you are conducting an environmental sociology study and you're using interview as your methodology to gather information or data, in this case, you have to be incredibly careful that you are sure that this person is a member of the specific subgroup that you're interested in studying, and that this person is not a member in another subgroup or has conflicting membership in different kinds of groups in society. And can you be sure that you think the person is a member of the subgroup, and when you interview them is conducting the interview with you, the conversation with you, as a member of that subgroup? But what happens if the person is there and is answering the questions based on that person's membership in another kind of subgroup? And by membership, I don't necessarily mean that somebody has a card that says they're a member of that. And in your interview, if you cannot be 100% sure that the person is representing a particular subgroup, and it was that subgroup that you were interested in, then your findings put in relationship to the research question you have about that particular subgroup, well, those findings might very well be incorrect. And this is a reason why conducting just one interview might be insufficient in an environmental sociology study. But on the other hand, it depends upon who you're interviewing and why, and how good you are at making sure that the person is actually the correct representative of what you're actually trying to get to. This is one of the reasons why that typically in environmental sociology studies, if interviews are used as a method, then a series of interviews are conducted with perhaps more than one person that is a part of a subgroup, or people that are parts of a subgroup and people that are not parts of the subgroup or group or institution or organization or whatever it is, whatever the study is that you're looking at. So society and your norms and ideas, your own. Beginning in the 1980s, there has been a greater and greater emphasis in increasing numbers of so-called modern and postmodern societies on the individual. Collective solutions are not in vogue and are actively discouraged by some kinds of ideologies. In a way similar to how many of my students still think that they are green, that since they are green consumers, that makes them ecological citizens. They have been socialized into seeing society in a particular way. Here they conflate ecological citizenship with green consumerism. In such a society with green consumerism, in such an individually based, market-based society, your primary purpose is to be a consumer, not a citizen, and you exercise your choices and your ideas via your consumption. In such a society, and that is a society, and sociologists study societies, in such a society, the political sphere of life and the civic society have taken a back seat in your mind, in your drive forward to consuming and your way of defining yourself by the stuff you have and surround yourself with. Notice that even if you are being a green consumer, that is also a way of identifying yourself. That is something which sociologists are also interested in. They can see how individuals identify themselves as being parts of different parts of society. They have sort of markers in terms of language use, in terms of habits, in terms of their consumer habits, and so forth. And so being a green consumer, this is a way of identifying and building up your identity. And it shows that you belong to a particular group or a particular tribe, and sometimes to a particular semi-political group, although it might not be a party political kind of group. And what does all that have to do with citizenship and duties and rights? Well, it doesn't have anything to do with that. And if you're an environmental studies program student here, you recognize this argument from a previous course. Let's come back to haunt you, so to speak, here. And this orientation, this individualization on the part of many students in the environmental studies program, which is not unique to just those students in the environmental studies program, but is a condition, shall we say, that increasing numbers of individuals in society have in an increasingly individualistic society. And this can we see in what happens when students come to the environmental sociology sociology course in the environmental studies program. And they have their individualistic approach to society. And some of them seem to have the idea that, well, I'll just take the things that I learned in the environmental psychology course and I'll gather some data and I'll rebrand this as environmental sociology. And then some of those students get quite a shock, even though they're told that you can't do that when it comes to the grading of their paper. Because you're supposed to be doing a small study in environmental sociology. You're not solving the problems of the world. You're supposed to do that small study to work with some of the theories and methodologies and models of environmental sociology, so you know that. Later on, perhaps in another course, you can combine environmental psychology and environmental sociology into one study, but being very careful about the methodology and the theories and the models and so forth. Those of you who are somewhat at the moment stuck with an individualistic approach to society and you think this applies to environmental sociology, okay, it'll be a learning experience. It'll be a great opportunity to learn and reflect on your own preconceived notions about society and perhaps grow into ecological citizens instead of remain trapped in the little world of Green's consumerism. To be able to carry out a study that combines environmental sociology and environmental psychology, that might be something that you would be able to do in the future. But first you have to be able to work solely within environmental sociology. You have to, by analogy, so to speak, you first need to learn to be able to crawl and then walk based on environmental sociology. And then you could add on environmental psychology and run your marathon. But you're not there yet. On the other hand, if you are more interested with or have a more activistic perspective, perhaps knowing more about environmental sociology can help inform you working from environmental psychology models and theories, trying to change people's behavior, trying to change something to more environmentally friendly behavior, whatever that means. So by including ideas and understanding from environmental sociology, you might be more successful in designing your campaigns and interventions. Typically, somebody who's working from an environmental psychology kind of perspective might be thinking, okay, I have to identify particular people and I design my campaign and my intervention and I work at one person at a time, because that's what environmental psychology is, one person at a time. But this is certainly not something which is scalable. I mean, it is incredibly resource inefficient to have a meeting with one person at a time. But that might be something that you need to do, but you might need to, from an environmental sociology kind of perspective, identify which individuals in a group or an institution or organization you need to meet with first. Because those people might sort of create ripples in the water of the social norms in the group or the organization that they are in. If you had a more environmental sociological perspective, you might still be working with individuals from time to time, but probably you'll be working more with groups and organizations in the first instance, and that seems to be a much more time-efficient way to work. So I hope that you're understanding here, and I'll be talking more about environmental sociology in another lecture. I hope this can be helpful if you're viewing this from an activistic kind of perspective. So I'd like to try to summarize some of the content of this video into one overview picture. And yes, this is a PowerPoint slide that you're viewing here, and it's converted into an MP4 file, and it is edited into this video essay. If you're a student who constantly wants the PowerPoints from the lectures instead of taking notes, this is the only PowerPoint in this recorded lecture. And you can pause the video and go back and listen to it and take notes if you need to. So no more PowerPoint presentations in this lecture. The papers you may have seen me holding in my hands are not PowerPoint slides. So that was all for this video essay today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for participating. At some point I'm going to make a follow-up or part 2 to this video essay dealing with, on the one hand, environmental psychology and the other environmental sociology. In that case, that video, the continuation or part 2, will appear here. Otherwise, the YouTube algorithm seems to be suggesting that you might want to watch this one.